Lee, man, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I don't even know how many times this is, 7, 8, 9. It's been a lot, but that's only because I love having you on. I love our discussions. For anybody that has been living under a rock for like the last 30 some years, would you mind giving us just a quick background as to who you are and maybe what's new in your world?
Absolutely. Well, I always look forward each year for your text saying, "Hey, am I available?" This is always a highlight for me to sit and talk shop with you. So thank you. But yeah, I started out in teaching. I was a phys ed teacher. I was fortunate enough to be an athlete that played a lot of sports in high school, 2 in college, and fell in love with athletics and sports in general. And then I got into teaching, and after a couple of years, I kind of took the route of doing my master's full time, and that kind of got me into strength and conditioning full time. And this was back in 1991 when I was at the United States Sports Academy, and I had a roommate of mine who was a kind of getting into the strength coach world, and he actually everybody had to do a mentorship, and we were both trying to get into the college area, and he was able to get under, you'll love this, he was able to get under Boyd Epley at Nebraska.
Oh, wow.
He was able,
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Especially at that time, 91, So he went there, and I was trying to get into college. I couldn't make it work, so I ended up being a strength coach at a place called Bolletari's Tennis Academy, which everybody now knows it as IMG.
Yep.
When I went there, it was strictly tennis, and so I was under a guy by the name of Pat Etcheberry, who actually was he and Boyd and Bruno Parletta and Johnny, all these guys were the kind of the foundation of the NSCA way back. And so I was pretty fortunate to be there, and I had some really good European strength coaches that were in the tennis world and taught me a lot of how South America did things. It was pretty cool. So that kind of got me interested. So several years I went into that business of strength and conditioning and chased it around, and I went back into teaching, but I actually became a head strength coach at a high school as well as coaching football and basketball and other sports. But so over the years I just kind of chased this world we're in, and it was really a curiosity of mine, especially the speed part. And isn't it funny how kind of who you are as an athlete, that's what you chase? And, I was, in college, I'm 148 pounds, 50 pounds, basketball player, but I was quick as lightning. That was that's what allowed me to play college sports. And so I chased it. And that kind of led me today to where I am, and just kind of learned a lot. I was really curious, and I shut my mouth early on, and I listened and I watched, and I started to develop my own concepts of what movement is. So that led me to where I am today.
I love it. And I'd like to actually dig a little bit deeper there, because I will put in the show notes a link to all of the other podcasts we've done. So you can go back, and I would highly recommend listening to those. But I think one of the things that's fascinating to me is how you went about learning speed, right? Because, and we'll talk about here in a little bit just how pervasive some of these thoughts and how these concepts were, but you took a really kind of contrarian approach to learning speed. So would you mind talking a little bit about how you went about kind of formulating some of these concepts?
Yeah. Well, I'll relate it to the weight room for a second. So let's say you're training an athlete, young kid, or maybe a high school, college level young person, and they're doing a squat or an RDL or something incorrectly, and you're giving them feedback, and you're trying to help them. How many of them are going to go and research and watch film and look at it and approach it that way? Probably not. You might get a couple out of 200 that you have that might. Well, that's what happened to me. I'm a college basketball player. I still remember the day. We're preseason, and we had another guy. It wasn't our head coach that was specifically doing this, but he was the guy that took us through all our conditioning and stuff. And he puts us on the line, and we're running, and he would blow the whistle. We couldn't go till he blow the whistle. Well, when you blow the whistle, you take off and go. Well, he kept blowing the whistle a second time, third time, and said, "You guys are doing it wrong. Stop going backwards first." And I'm sitting here thinking, what is he talking about? We kept going, and he kept doing it. So eventually I was a captain, and I said to him, I'm like, "Coach, I don't I don't understand what do you mean we're doing it wrong? I said, you're blowing the whistle. We're all taking off and going. So anyway, he said, well, you guys are stepping back. And he kind of demonstrated you're going back. And he said, it shows like shoulders going up. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not doing that at all.
Right.
And so it got me curious. And then I started to watch film, like when we got into the season. I said, I just want to see what I move like and what other athletes move like. So I started watching film, and it was hard back then. It's not like it is now. Now you can get on Huddle or Synergy or all these things that they watch.
Yeah.
You couldn't do that. I literally had to go into our media area, and they had to, hook up tape and all this. It was kind of cumbersome, but I was curious. So I started watching, and I'm thinking, I'm doing everything different than what they're telling me to do, but yet I'm making great plays. Like people, I'm defending well, offensively, I'm getting by people, I'm quick, and I noticed, well, so isn't everybody else. The guy that just blew by me, he's doing everything that coaches are saying don't do.
Right.
So that got me thinking, and this was probably 1987-ish, something like that. And so I'm a junior in college, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is just curious. And I was a phys ed major, so I was in kinesiology, biomechanics, and classes like that. So I kind of got intrigued by it. So over the years, I started to kind of pay attention. And when I got out of college, I started to pay attention to movement more and started to really look at it and study it. And I'm saying, okay, when I have these kids in class and I'm doing these agility exercises and speed and quickness, I'm like, every one of them just reacts. They all, their feet, what I call now repositioning steps, and there's multiple ways to do that. And so it got me really curious, and so I started questioning a lot of people. I'm like, no, that's not right. I said, that isn't right. They're like, well, why would you go backwards if you want to go forwards? I'm like, yeah, but you're missing the point. I'm not going backwards. I'm
right.
Yeah, I'm actually not going backwards. And then I still didn't know enough about, kind of the human laws of movement. And I didn't know quite about elasticity. I started to read way back then, old Don Chu stuff. And, and some German textbooks on sprinting and training. And so I started to kind of understand plyometrics a little bit. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's kind of it. I said, it's not jumping off a box. It's not, pogo jumps. It's not that. But I said, in a horizontal, angular fashion, I'm actually trying to attract this elastic response, which gives me the opportunity to move quicker. So that stuff started to make, but I still was, trying to, how when you first learn something, you kind of have an idea, but you're like, oh my gosh, I just opened up another door that is confusing me. So I was I was questioning people. I was doing things like that, but I didn't have all the answers. And I still don't have all the answers, but I have a pretty good grasp on why things happen. And then I started to realize, well, wait a minute. The reason when I was guarding that guy on film in college and my leg kind of went from this bent athletic stance to kind of a straighter position, a little bit straighter and stiffer, is because I needed that length, that stiffness to be able to create a quick reaction off the ground, whether we call it an impulse or whatever. And that's kind of how it all started. And then I just kind of built concepts from there.
Yeah. It's so interesting too, because if you are 20 or maybe even in your early 30s listening to this, you're probably like, wow, that sounds really awful. But I remember going back, because I was obsessed with shooting, right?
Yeah.
Like basketball, I would always watch film. I loved watching teams that played motion offenses. So I remember I wore out these VHS tapes. I had Ball State versus Kansas, first round of the tournament. I remember Ball State getting beat. All the great old Big Ten games, IU versus Michigan when the Fab Five were there. It was cumbersome though, dude. Going back, there wasn't slow-mo. You can't scrub it forward and backward. If you really had to be a student of the game to want to take a VHS tape and break it down and watch somebody move or watch their mechanics. It was just incredibly cumbersome.
It was hard. And even when it was getting a book and stuff, it was going into the index and thumbing through and saying, okay, there's the H and there's, and finding it and then walking along the bookshelf. And there it is, and going and sitting in a cubicle. I remember at Cortland State where I went, I'd sit up on the third floor. I always would go to this one back corner cubicle by myself And
Yep.
that was because I needed silence. Things drove me nuts. So
Yeah.
I'd always go up there and I'd sit there with a book and have, it's funny because people don't even think they even use them anymore, but I have, here my
Oh yeah.
index cards, and I would just make my notes and put them on those, and
That's awesome.
that's how I would remind myself of things, and I'd keep them with me. And it's, now you can just use this.
Yeah, right. That does everything.
Yeah, but for me, I still to this day I write things. I have like 4 of these smaller notebooks,
Hmm.
and I just have all my tabs. And I like to write because it helps me learn, and because it takes me longer to write, my thoughts can be adjusted more. But
Yes.
when it's really really quick, sometimes I'm like I should have did something else. But when I write,
Yes.
it gives me time to do that.
Well, and they say it actually helps you kind of strengthen that connection
It
when you
does,
take the
yeah.
time to write it out. Because I do the same thing. I mean, these were like notes I was
Oh
taking
yeah,
last night. I mean, so one of the other things that I'm really interested in, and then we'll actually talk shop here in a minute, is, when you were coming out, right? Because you had some very contrarian thoughts,
yeah,
right? And in the best possible way, right? Like, I feel like there's 2 types of contrarians. There are contrarians who are literally, doing it for the right reasons. And they're like, no, I think what we're doing is wrong and I want to challenge that. And then there are people that just want to kind of be a pain in the
yeah,
ass, right?
yeah,
For lack of a better
exactly.
term. And that's fine too. I think the world needs some of those people.
Yeah.
But what was it like early for you in your career? Because again, you're challenging some of the big names in our industry and you're saying, hey, I don't think some of these things are correct. So what was that like for you coming into the industry and making, some of these really bold statements that ultimately now we uphold and we're like, yeah, that's absolutely the way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. It was early on when I was really young, and even before I got into kind of more of this, the national stage of, going to speaking at big clinics and
Yeah.
workshops, or even attending. Before I even did that stuff, in my local area, I would challenge coaches on techniques because I was, attending clinics and workshops locally. You do it as
Mm-hmm.
a high school coach, like there's a basketball clinic, so you go, or a track clinic or whatever. And so I would go and I'd get talking with different coaches, and area football coaches were the toughest. And,
Sure.
and I can remember stating, I'm like, I think this is wrong. What we're trying to do, we're talking about this thing called a false step, or about laterally moving and how we use the front leg and all this stuff. And they were like, absolutely not, that's crazy. And I can remember this old time coach. I got asked to talk. There was a guy in our area that was an equipment, strength training equipment
Yeah.
salesman. It wasn't Nautilus, but it was something like that.
Sure.
And he asked me one time, he said, hey, would you want to come and just do a little thing? And this was like the mid 90s. And he goes, what I'll do is, you kind of talk to the coaches. They brought in ADs, coaches, and trainers and stuff. And I spoke on all those things. Back then, I started to name it plyo step, hip turn, the lateral gait cycle, directional steps, and things like that. And I can remember when I started talking about the full step, I can remember this one particular coach. He's sitting in the back like this, and he's got his hat on, crooked
Yeah.
football coach,
Yeah.
big guy. And
Yeah.
he started talking to the guy next to him, and he's going like this. I could just see it right off.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I asked a question, I said, "You guys have any questions on this?" Because I know they started at me like, pray, bam, they
Yeah.
went right at me, and I just and I just went at them. I'm like, but just watch your athletes, and. So it was tough. And then when I went, like you're talking, when I started to challenge, the guys in the industry way back then on some of these techniques, especially the lateral gait cycle and how it actually occurs when we watch it and stuff, it was brutal for a while because I felt like early on I was on an island and I was
Yeah.
a target. And because I was so sure of it, though, I'm like, I just have seen too much to not to back down on that stuff. It was tough, but
Right.
then I had did a video, and a guy, Ryan Lee did
Oh yeah.
launch with me on this original product I had called the groundbreaking movement. And it went out, and it was so funny because Ryan had a national audience.
Massive audience.
When that came out, it was half of them were like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good. I've been seeing this for years, but I thought I was wrong." To the other half, Taft, you're a jerk. You're that's the worst stuff. You're changing. And it was, even Ryan was like, "Holy cow, that was polarizing." I got people on each side. But then over time, a lot of people were like, I actually am seeing that, and I've been trying to change it, and it's hard to change. I'm like, well, that's why, because the body wants to do it. So it was tough for a while though.
I can only imagine. Now, I've got so many things, like, every time I bring you on here, there's like 1,000 things we could talk about. I wanted to kind of narrow the focus today, and I want to talk about basketball, right? We're obviously both passionate about basketball. Yeah. We've been in the game for a long time. You're not only a strength coach and speed coach, but an actual basketball coach.
Yeah.
And so some of the things that I wanted to start with are some of the, let's just say, some of the basketball specific movements that we see, and you see them across all sports, right?
Yeah.
But really how basketball coaches are teaching some of these things. And I would love to get your thoughts on it. And we can kind of go back and forth here a little bit. But one of the things I would love to start with is a closeout, right? And again, I still see kids to this day, they will sprint out to close out and take away space from somebody. And as soon as they get close, they're taking about 38 little steps on their toes to close out. So in all the times we talked, I don't know if I've ever heard you describe how you coach a closeout. Could we just start there? And then we can kind of dive into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we always talk to the kids about what's the goal first. And it changed over the years. When my first year coaching was 1989, back then, the 3-point line was only in existence for 2 years. So, you got teams that might shoot 5 an entire game. You got kids that are shooting 10 by themselves,
right. The game is different.
Yeah. So closing out wasn't necessarily to stop a jump shooter always. It was to stop a drive. So, you could sit down a little sooner and kind of, get in a defensive stance earlier. Now you got to run people off the line, or you got to get in their space really quick. So having said that, one thing we do is we start them on the person first and show them this is what we want to look like when we arrive. And this is not a runoff. So when you're like Steph Curry, I'm not even thinking about sitting down. I'm thinking about running by him to make him have to either take an extra dribble or shot fake, at least make him do something different.
Right.
But for most kids, you're going to go out and we show them, if I'm trying to angle them to the sideline, we have what we call an offset defensive stance. So let's say I'm trying to push them to the baseline and my left foot's the high foot. So my left foot is higher to half court. And my right foot's a little bit closer to the baseline side. Just angle them a little bit, and that's where we want to be. Then what we do is we do what we call a shuffle closeout. So we'll start a couple feet away, up to 5 feet away, and we shuffle into it, and then we decelerate. But what it starts to do, Mike, is they start to learn how to angulate, and almost like, like a skier has to angle to stop. So now we're starting the process of decelerating. Inside foot, outside foot, stop. And then what we have from there is we have what we call a bounce off. So if I close out really fast on you and I get too close to you, like I'm really tight, we just bounce back. We bounce off. Now I'm an arm's length. So now I can, defend you appropriately without getting too close, and now I'm an easy target to get beat. So we show them how to get the stance. We show them how to shuffle into it, and then how to bounce off. Then we use what we call a 2-step approach or a 4-step approach. A 2-step would be, I'm kind of close to the same elbow that's near the wing you're at. So I'm pretty close. It'd take me 1, 2, sit down and defend, and take whatever gather steps you need to make sure you have that. And again, like you said, it's not taking these really short, choppy, multiple steps where when I do that, in order to maintain my balance, I have to rise up. Chest comes high, hips come under, and that's really not where I want to be athletically. So we go 1, 2, maybe it's like step, 1, 2, step, and maybe another adjustment, and then a bounce off. So we'll do that. Now, let's say the ball's on the other wing, and I'm guarding you, and I have a foot in the lane, or I'm on the split line. Now we call that a 4-step. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, gather and stop. And so
Yep.
we take them through. Of course, it's not going to always be perfect 2 steps, perfect 4 steps,
No.
but it's the concept of how we want to begin acceleration.
Yep.
And so once we do that, now we have a framework of what it looks like to be able to close out. And then it's like, okay, offense always has the advantage. Let's say they give us a quick shot fake, and that rises us a little bit, and then they jab to our top foot. What do? So what we teach there is if you come towards my top foot, which should be above your foot, we do what we call a snap shuffle. And a snap shuffle is this quick little pop-up, just enough. All I'm saying is, no, you're not going to the middle. You're going to stay. So I don't have to rotate my hips like we do on the baseline side, which we call a lateral run. I just snap real quick, and then I'll bounce, and maybe I'll waddle. We have what we call a waddle action, and we'll do that to keep you there. Now, if you go baseline side of my bottom foot, which is where I kind of want you to go, we tell our kids right off, anticipate a power lateral run. So you're going to explode laterally, bring that top foot across, turn your hips, get there, and try to leverage that baseline. Or because we use rotation of our help, guy rotates over, we're okay if you go that way and you do beat me because we got help. And that's our standard and our concepts of teaching. So that determines my footwork. So we snap shuffle high, we laterally run low.
Yep.
And if you fake me, jab like I'm going low, and I start going that way, but then you capture my top foot, now we teach them how to hip turn.
Yep.
And then we go to whatever we need from there. So it's letting the athletes know it's okay. You're going to get beat. That's part of it. Get used to it. You can't stop good players. But if you have these footwork patterns down and we make sure they understand. So if this pen is my upper body, the end is my head, my hips have to always be behind my shoulders and head. So when I hip turn, I go this way. I don't want to get on that vertical axis because then when I rotate, it sits me back on my heels. And then I start going back too much, especially if they bump me. I'm going to get knocked off. So that's the basic idea of what our closeout looks like. And then we adjust. And the other one I didn't talk about is we do have what we call a runoff to recover. Mm-hmm. So I'm running, you're getting ready to shoot it. I'm running, jumping past you, and then we go 1, 2 landing, turn, and then hustle back and play and probably have to peel off or something like that. But
yeah. No, I love that. And one of the things that I have found, I love the idea of showing them the endpoint first, because one of the things when I'm teaching this, I love band resistance. I know I've stolen that from you. It's just such a great tool in so many aspects, right? Because it slows them down. It helps them control momentum. It takes away this feeling or this sensation that they have to do things fast when they're starting, right? Like, I don't need fast initially. I need efficient, and then we can be fast.
That's right.
And I think that's something that whenever you're talking about speed, people immediately want to show you how fast they are. It's like, hey, man, let's be efficient first. But anyway, I love band resistance for that. And I love band resistance because when you slow them down, I think it helps them settle into and find those positions that you're looking for.
That's right.
Because the other thing is, too, if you speed things up too much, then the finished position isn't always where you want it.
That's right.
Right? They're not balanced or they're on their toes a little bit. And I'm like, look, man, the second you're really on your toes and you can't find your heels, you're committed to going forward.
That's right.
So you're not going to be as efficient and effective moving out of that.
Exactly. Well, what's great is we have what we call a 3-phase deceleration system, and your band resisted is phase 1. We call that hit the position. Let's hit it. So it'd be like, putting a stool out, trying to teach somebody how to do a squat. All right, just sit down, put your butt on the stool. Let's start right there. Slow down. Sit there. This is where your knees should be. Okay, now stand up off the box. All right, well, that's the closeout beginning stage. If you put the band around them, you're taking a pretty large percentage, depending on how heavy your band is, off their body weight. And all we're saying is just learn to hit the end position. Hit it.
Yep.
When we take the band off, now we're starting to say, okay, now can you control that position? And then when I assist you into it, so let's say I'm standing out of bounds, pulling my player into the closeout. So I'm actually making them go faster. That's called owning the position, and that's down the road.
Yep.
That's when you hit it, then you control it, then you own it by where you bring the band. So that's perfect. Perfect example of that. Yep.
Yeah. I love it. So another point that I think kind of goes seamlessly into this, and we have talked about this before, but I want to reiterate this point, is this idea of the power of the heels, right? Because I still see people and coaches that are teaching their athletes, hey, you got to be on your toes, got to be on your toes. And we can agree, hey, I do want your weight shifted forward towards your toes, but when your heels aren't on the ground, that is problematic as well. So could you speak to that a little bit and the power of the heels?
Yeah, definitely. And in a few different examples here, because if we're in a defensive stance and I don't have full foot contact, and that doesn't mean equal pressure. I might, like you said, I need the pressure towards the forefoot because that's going to be how I propel myself, and I can project my hips in a direction really quick. But by having contact with the heel, I get to access full use of my friction, my tread, and that helps me be able to cut, helps me be able to, put more force into the ground. So if I'm only on the balls of the foot, well, that little surface, that's all I have to create force with. But if I'm here and I have more contact, then I can use that as well. The other part is when, I don't know if you saw the video of Kyrie hurting his knee.
I tried not to watch those.
I broke it down and I slowed it down into pieces. And the first thing I noticed is when he went into this long stride, he was trying to separate and go long.
Yep.
Typically what he would do, or any athlete would do, it would be a heel contact.
Yeah.
The heel contact supports the knee joint because of dorsiflexion and the gastroc connection.
Yep.
Well, he didn't get, it was almost like he was above the ground. He didn't hit the heel. He hit flat-footed.
Oh,
so when
yeah.
he hit flat-footed, now he didn't have that, that double joint of the gastroc that could support that, flexion of the knee, and it just hyperextended. When you could just see it, there was like no stability there at all, and he's in a plantar flex position as that leg is way out in front of him.
Yeah.
So the power of the heel, when you land on that heel in a quick deceleration move or whatever, it's so proprioceptive and it it's a conduit to all the muscles up that lower leg.
Yes.
And the rear foot, the midfoot, and the forefoot, all those connections, go through that heel. So when we touch that heel, it gives us so much feedback as to how to decelerate. It allows us to buy time and go into a little bit of plantar, then dorsi, then knee flexion, and then the hip support and all that. So they're really, really important to have heel contact just for kinesthetic and proprioceptive, purposes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you talk about breaking, the thing that I keep trying to explain to my athletes and as well as other coaches is that you need time, right? Yeah. You need time and you need the ability to distribute force. Yes. So what happens is you get on your toes, like you alluded to, if like a Kyrie or somebody, if there's no heel contact, the time is incredibly short and you don't have time to distribute those forces. So you talk about lower leg. I'm just thinking even further up the chain, right? If I find my heel, hey, I've got my hamstrings. I've got my glutes and my hips. I've got all these big muscles versus if it's just my toe, I basically got my quads and my knee joint.
That's right.
So you're not distributing that force. It's so focal. And I think that's part of why we see so many, not just ACL injuries, but we see so much like jumper's knee and patellofemoral stuff these days. We just don't have. And it's funny because, the industry is so circular.
Yeah.
Right? For a while, everybody's posterior chain, anterior chain. Well, they're both important.
That's right.
Right? But it's about context. And I think, man, the heel just gives us time to distribute those forces. And it's so powerful. And if you're missing that portion of it, not just for injury perspective, but from a performance perspective as well. I just don't think your body's going to hold up as long if you can't distribute those forces.
That's right. And it's being able to do it from, pretty much a linear or sagittal, plane, planting that foot out in front of me, or angular. Because when we're talking the closeout, it's the same thing. I'm hitting them on different angles, but I'm hitting the heel first and then I roll
Yes.
to that foot. And that buys me time, like you said, up the chain. My glutes and hamstrings get involved and do their job to protect me and keep the knees in position. And yeah, it's so important to do that. And we get confused, especially a lot of the younger trainers who have heard, balls of the feet, balls of the feet, balls of the feet.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's times when that's probably the worst thing you want to do, because when you're balls of the feet, you're typically a little bit more plantar flexed in a lot of cases. And now that ankle joint is so exposed, to potential injury, but it's just not as a productive position to decelerate your body,
Yep.
So yeah.
I love it. I'm sorry, dude. My gosh, serious frog in my throat today. So one final topic I want to talk about, kind of while we're talking about closeouts and heels, is this idea of braking mechanics. Yeah. And I actually wish we would have started the recording like 5 minutes before we did, because we were on such a great little tangent. But I would love to hear more about that, because obviously braking mechanics are a big piece. We're tracking braking now. You got people that are measuring braking on force plates, and they're measuring braking on horizontal decelerations. But you had something really interesting to say about why maybe we're having some of these braking issues, and just kind of how we're developing kids and how kids are developing these days. So would you maybe just speak to that a little bit and some of the stuff that you're seeing with the kids that you're coaching?
Yeah, it's it's funny you say that too, because I wish we did. At the beginning, we started rolling really fast on this topic, and it's funny that you and I tend to do that. It's like, yes, we hit a topic, man, and it's like it's 0 to 60 really,
I know. We're
really
always
quick.
going.
It's like,
yes,
but there's so much into this concept of decelerating or braking, and when young athletes are exposed to these higher, thresholds or demands of the, movement or their body mass, because not every kid, they may be young, but they may be big, and they don't have those abilities to decelerate their body really well. And the mechanics that they use often are, how do you say it? It's kind of like it's not only that they've been maybe shown the wrong way, but they didn't have an exposure as growing up and playing and having just things that would happen naturally, like maybe we did growing up. So they're behind the 8 ball already. So now when they're going into whether it's a training session or they're playing sports, they just don't have a vast background of deceleration repetitions. And I'm not even talking about taught repetitions. I'm just talking about playing
exposures.
Games. Exposures, exactly. Yeah. That's the word I was looking for. They just haven't had that. So you and I sometimes have to go against what we know might be the best, most efficient way, and we have to adapt to what that particular group of athletes now, or a generation of athletes, can handle. Yeah. Because if they don't have the physical attributes that maybe, some other athletes might have because they just had more exposure and more play when they were younger, now we have to adjust to that. And I found myself doing that. Like, I used to be more aggressive with some of the things I did on deceleration, on braking mechanics, on whether it's 2 feet offset, 1 foot backwards.
Yeah.
But part of the reason, Mike, I started to really introduce this deceleration or braking mechanism called a T-step, and that's a backwards to forwards, which we see is, now you'll commonly see people do that, especially at higher speeds. They just naturally go back to our conversation of full foot contact and letting my heel have some say in this matter. But I also find myself now, I don't even spend as much time with the vertical heel. If kids do it, they do it. I don't discourage it. Sure. But I almost, when I'm teaching it now, I put them immediately to the T-step, because I don't know that they have the tensile strength that maybe you and I had growing up, because we played so much and jumped so much and did so many things. So I've adjusted my philosophy on, back pedal, vertical heel, boom, go. Now it's
Right.
back pedal, T-step, go. Just because I'm trying to protect them, and if they do it naturally, they do it naturally with a vertical heel. But I'm almost making an adjustment to what I probably would have did 20 years ago, just because I'm like, I don't know if the kids have had enough stress on those
Right.
positions, in the right
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
In the right way. And I'm not talking because I know a lot of kids are in travel sports and they are playing a lot, but they got really bad habits and they're not actually doing it correctly. So yeah, it's funny. I think we've had to adjust some of our mechanical things just to help kids overcome lack of exposures. And that's sometimes hard to do, as a coach. But
Absolutely. For me, I think this is what you're saying. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I hate sounding like, oh, back in the day, I hate being that coach, but you have to be just honest about where we're at, right?
Yeah.
Our foundation of just play and movement was massive.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Because we didn't have the opportunities, the TV, internet, video games, all that. Stacked on top of that was generally a massive sports background for most of us as well, right? Even if we didn't play formal sports, like think about how gym class used to be. My gym class used to be, hey, we're going to take 2 weeks or a month. We're going to learn how to throw a football. We're going to learn how to catch a football. We're going to learn all the skills, and then we're going to take a week or two, and we're going to go play football.
That's right.
So you think about the massive amount of just game exposures, right? And, I mean, you know how it is now, right? Yeah. It's like little Johnny's in year-round baseball, and my God, he can throw this medicine ball as hard as possible, but he can't walk and chew gum or bear crawl or skip. Right. So it's like the foundation isn't what it used to be. And so what I found myself doing is like, hey, man, I got to teach these kids all these things that they haven't learned somewhere else.
That's right.
So like when I teach Kendall in soccer, she didn't play basketball because, well, hell, until about 2 years ago, she was like 10th percentile height and weight. I was like, you got no future here, girl. But she played so much soccer. She's great, forward and backward, but she doesn't have the side to side. So it's like, okay, this is a movement gap we have to fill in.
Yeah.
And so that's what's been really interesting about this is now it's like, hey, like all this stuff that you and I would consider general, foundational stuff, we have to teach this to these kids now because they're not getting it other places.
Exactly. It's so true. And I had this conversation with my son, Brennan, the other day. We were talking about because he unfortunately wasn't able to finish the basketball season. He had a bad sprained ankle. He stepped on a kid's foot and he missed our, and he's kind of now getting back in. And he was like, the other night we did I had some open gym and we did some shooting and a little bit of, half court stuff. And he goes, man, I didn't realize how out of shape I was. And I said, well, you were a month, 6 weeks, you couldn't do anything, other than he worked out, did weightlifting, he did a little bit of bike work. And I said, Brendan, the one thing, and I know you get tired, and Jay and Bailey used to get tired of hearing me saying it all the time, but I said, the one thing we use this word now, capacity, a lot. Well, because we played so much, I don't ever remember a time being a kid when I would truly say I was out of shape. I would say maybe I wasn't quite ready to play at my highest level of basketball, or when I played football, I didn't quite, but I was never like, after 5 minutes done. Because we played so much. And so the capacities of obviously our cardio system, my tissues, all these things, everything had stress all the time.
Yeah.
Good stress because I was playing so many games.
Sure.
And to your point on lateral movement, the number of times we would play these games, we'd take these tape, and you'd wrap this tape up. So like here's a wrap, but you would wrap it up into a ball, and it'd be this hard ball, and then we would chase each other around and throw it at each other. Well, your ability to dodge was like, I don't want to get hit by that thing. That thing's like a rock. Yeah. And we would play that, and we would do games like that all the time. So the ability to change directions and cut, it was just organically built up over time. And now we spend time teaching this quality because kids they don't get it. Even though they play a lot of basketball or a lot of volleyball or softball on their travel team, they're still not getting a designated period of time of going back to your conversation about 20 minutes ago when you said, at some point, you got to just slow them down, let them feel it, hit the positions, understand what they're going to be facing, and then build them back up. They don't get that.
Yep.
They don't get that. They go right into 6 games on a weekend, and they don't ever get the chance to learn and build true capacities.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And like, I'm always taking notes. But one of the things that I always come back to, and you've talked about this for years, and every time I run speed camp, you want to know what the most popular game we play is? Tag.
Yeah.
Literally, because these kids have, like, I don't know if they've ever really played tag. They think it's the best game ever. We play flag tag. Now, granted, they're older now, so you can't do that. But they love flag tag. And one of the things that I think I found, too, is this is what's really sad. So you and I are both just sports connoisseurs, right?
Yes.
We're always, like, watching, learning. One of the things they used to always talk about with Brazilian soccer players was their creativity.
Yes.
Right? Because they're not coming up in a club system. Like, if you're really good, sure, but they learn playing in the streets.
That's right.
Right? It's like street soccer. One of the things that I found is a lot of these kids have gotten older is there's a lack of creativity.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's so, the practice is mundane. You do this, do this, do this. So like robots, right?
Exactly.
They know, I take my touch here, I go here, I do this move in this situation, versus you and I both know, hey man, sports, well, it's not a sport, but games like tag, right? Things that are more free-flowing and more organic lead to creativity, and the best athletes have elements of that in their game.
Yeah, that is so true. And really, if you could bottle that and say, okay, a child has been born, and when they get up to, being able to move and run and stuff like that, because we can enter them into gymnastics or martial arts or the youth soccer, which we've all done with our kids. But if we said, hey, you're going to enter into this program and it's going to be based around tag, variations of tag, climbing and reacting to each other, one another. My son, when he was young, we used to do, and actually, I think it started in Indiana. It was Ninja Zone.
Oh, yeah. We used to take Cade. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brendan used to go to that. And I think it started there. I think the woman who started it, I think it was Indianapolis. But so he used to go to that, but they would be on, the monkey bars, and another kid would be coming the other way. So they had to dodge each other. Yeah. And I'm thinking, that's cool. Just so awesome. That's another creative way. And then they would run off walls and do the, kind of parkour type stuff. And I'm thinking, that's the gold. That's the gold. Just that human. I always talk about, if I were the czar of physical education, I would make physical literacy, that's the goal. We're going to become literate movers in all directions and reactions. And like you said, tag would lead the game. And there's so many forms of tag. Like, I have standards of different tag games based on lateral movement, angular movement. If I want to address hip turns, we do a different type of game. Yeah. And man, I just think that's what sets that foundation and builds those movement capacities. So yeah, I'm with you 100% on that.
I love it. And Rufus just shed a single tear when you talked about physical literacy. Anytime you talk about physical and movement literacy, Rufus is happy. So
oh yeah.
Shout out to our guy Roof, man. Okay, couple more topics. Did I hear you say, are you calling plyo steps repositioning steps now?
Yeah, so repositioning that's the governing tree, that's the tree, and then all the branches, like a plyo step would be anything linear of that frontal plane. A hip turn would be retreating. Okay. So that's kind of what that means. And then anything, lateral is obvious. We'll call that like a lateral plyo or whatever. But yeah, repositioning is just the act of repositioning.
I like that.
And the plyo step is typically forward based or angular based. So if we drew a line and we stood on the line, so if I'm standing on the center court line, and if I move forward or angular, anything in front of that, we call that a plyo. But if we go backwards, then we call that a hip turn. And so it just simplifies it when I'm coaching other coaches on it. But it falls under the family of repositioning. And then like the pop step, push, open, push would be
Yep.
That's that could have a plyo step, but if you're a base stealing, not necessarily. It doesn't have to if the foot doesn't reposition.
Perfect. Okay. So let's say somebody is totally new to the Lee Taft party, right? And they're like, well, I've always thought that was a false step. Could we just unpack that for a little bit? Like, why would you take that plyo step? Why would you hip turn instead of pivoting?
Right.
What are the fundamental differences, and why is that a more effective way to move?
Yeah. So typically when we're doing it, those movements, most of the time we're either still, and I don't mean just static. I just mean we're in a place and we might be bouncing a little bit or whatever, but we're basically vertical oriented. We're not going forward, backwards. And so if I have to move forward and I have to do it quickly, so I'm reacting to something that just happened in front of me. First of all, there's an override. I don't even think about it. And that's critical to know. That's kind of that fight or flight response. And when that occurs, what happens is one of my two legs and my feet are going to reposition behind me. And that is an escape mechanism. And so we put this into escaping current space and attacking new space. So if I perform this repositioning step to move forward, or we call a plyo step, what I'm actually doing is I'm taking advantage of the virtues of human movement as it relates to elasticity and quickness and escapability. And if I were to take those away and kind of plant my feet, and when I moved forward, I was not allowed to go behind my body, my center of mass, especially my hips. I wasn't allowed to do that. We would use more of a powerful movement. Like we would push longer, more time under tension to get myself moving. And that's not conducive to quick reactive speed. It doesn't get me moving forwards faster. As we're that repositioning. And the other part of a repositioning or a plyo step or a hip turn is the legs separate. So when my back leg sticks back, the front leg goes into a flexion. And when that flexion occurs, that action is supporting the back action. And it now is set up for it to drive down and then bring that back leg forward. So those repositioning steps, or this lack of not using them, like with false step, people would call it, and they don't want you to do that. The reason you slow yourself down is because you're taking away natural movement tendencies and energy. You're losing energy on that. And same thing with a hip turn. When I do that, I reposition on more of an appropriate or conducive angle that projects my hips in the direction of travel. When my feet are underneath me and I don't use those steps and I pivot or I kind of roll forward, I don't have advantage of my hips being in front of my point of push-off. They're actually above it. I roll, then I can push. But I can't really push too hard until I get in that position, which is too slow. And that's been proven. That's actually been shown on force plates and different things. So,
I love it. Yeah, the first thing I wrote down here was just finding angles, right? The second, like even athletes that you would describe as maybe not super intelligent, right? When you describe action reaction, if I want to go this way, I push that way. Like they understand that, right? So that idea of, and teaching them about finding angles is huge. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but this was probably like 8 or 10 years ago now when I was working with the Indy 11. I had a goalkeeper, super high level dude. I think he played like 500 career games.
Wow.
And he was taught very strictly that there is a false step and you never false step. And so we actually got in, we had a good relationship. So we had this spicy discussion about, hey, I don't think you're right about this. And so finally I went and I got film and I showed him, look, if you are on your line and a ball gets crossed and you want to come out and punch it away or catch it, what do you do? And I had film of him plyo stepping and sprinting out. He's like, okay, I get it now. And so, and this was a guy, literally, he was like 17 years in his career. But as soon as I explained to him, look, this is not only more efficient, this is what you actually do. And I remember you doing that one time. It was at one of the many seminars you had at our gym. And you literally said, okay, don't false step. And you would drop a tennis ball. And the second you add that element of competitiveness or reactivity or intent,
That's
They're
right.
sprinting, dude. They are going to sprint. They're going to plyo step, and they're going to get there.
That's right. Yep, it is. It's amazing. And that goes back to the opening statement with my college coach. That's what probably I would almost say, had I not gone through that experience, I don't know that I would have done all this, because that just sparked something in me and got me curious. And that's how it all started. But it was because of a coach saying, stop false stepping, stop stepping backwards. And I'm thinking, gosh, I know I'm not. And that's to your point, just like your soccer goalie there. And, and that is another profession, sport, because I worked, actually it was more my later stages of being in New York, and then I moved to Indiana. We were there for about 15 years. I would consult a lot with a soccer academy in the New England area. And this person was a soccer goalie specialist, and we used to go back and forth on a lot of this stuff. And she changed her approach, because she was the same way. She goes, no, feet are anchored, and then we just push. And I'm like, that's really hard to do. I mean, that's tough to do. And then she's finally said, oh, now she goes, now that's what saves a lot of our plays, from punching a ball that got chipped over the goalie's head, who's out a little bit. They hip turn and go. I said, well, I said, you don't probably even have to tell the athlete. They're going to do it anyway. Just put them in the drills that make that happen. But yeah, you definitely don't want to take it away.
Well, and you just think about, I mean, we're deep in the weeds here, but like, you just think about most soccer players, basketball players, they're not the most muscular movers anyways.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're elastic movers anyway. So now you're trying to put them in a position that, number one, isn't super efficient, and two, takes away from some of their inherent genetic advantages.
That's right.
Man, we're really not setting this kid up for success.
Yeah. Well, going back to basketball, I've had this discussion many, many times. I remember way back with Ty, we used to talk about this, because we would say, people would say, get lower, bend your knees, really get way down, and then move. And this was another really hot topic. Coaches would get mad at me, and I'm like, stop telling your athletes to bend their knees so much. And they're like, no, we got you want to get low. And I said, I want my athletes to move as fast as humanly possible. So why would I tell them to do something that's not conducive? But I said, here's what you're doing. When they bend and they have high levels of knee flexion, high levels of hip flexion, well, you got to come out of that stance to move. Like, you can't stay in that crouched position. But I said, if I'm up a little bit, just get them a little bit up where you're a little bit straighter. Now you're that continuum from strength, power, strength, speed, strength, we got to get on that side of it if we want to move better. So when defenders get a little bit higher, now they can tap into that elasticity. And it just becomes a quicker movement. There's times they're going to get a little lower, they're going to do stuff, but if you want to be really quick, you got to come up a little bit because you're faster. That's why sprinters don't squat down when they sprint like an acceleration does.
Right.
You get up so you're more elastic so you can reach your maximal speeds.
Yeah. Well, not to mention, it's just metabolically way more efficient.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm doing this presentation on like lateral movement, and I'm going through it and I'm demoing a lot of this stuff, right? And like mistakes. One of the things, if you've not sat in a defensive position for a while, right? I mean, we're in our 40s and 50s, right? You're not 18 anymore. Sit in a defensive position. Right? Camp out there, try and move laterally in a deep flex position for like 20, 30 seconds. You talk about quad conditioning, dude.
Yeah,
I mean, your legs are burning. It's hard.
It is.
So don't ask your athletes to do it if you haven't done it in a while either, because that you forget how hard this stuff is.
It is. It's really hard. And it's all about being as efficient as possible and being quick and angry. Even when you decelerate to change directions, the more you bend and squat into that, well, you still got to come out of it. But if you angulate with a straighter leg, well, you're being more elastic, and your body will naturally bend as much as it has to manage all that mass moving.
Yes.
If I'm moving really fast, I'll probably bend a little more. But if it's really quick, like a couple steps, and almost like a wide receiver doing a skinny post, it's like pop, 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 pop. But if they're running a hard cutback, they'll squat a little more. Well, that's intuitive mass and momentum control.
I love that. Okay, one more topic, and then I'll let you go. One of the things that you said when we first met, and I will never forget this, because when I first met Lee Taft, the speed guy, and I'm consuming everything, brought you to iFast, went and hung out with you in your garage in Newcastle, right? When you
Yeah.
were on the south side, I'd hang out. And one of the things that you told me, because I just naturally assume, well, he's a speed guy, so he trains speed for an hour or an hour and a half. And you're like,
Yeah.
generally my speed sessions take like 15, 20 minutes. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, right? Talk to me a little bit about that, because I do think there's this misconception of, and I see it, dude. I see it when I see people talking about speed camps. I run speed camps. And I would like to think I, try and do a very good job of it and
Yeah.
uphold your standards. But I do see these speed camps where kids are doing speed for an hour straight.
Yeah.
So would you talk to me a little bit about where speed fits into your overall program? Because I think if people haven't heard you talk about that before, that's going to be really enlightening and eye-opening for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because that same thing, we run a lot of speed. When you're running a speed camp, that's a different animal, because what you're trying to do is introduce concepts, and you got a lot of concepts to whether it's coaches or athletes. And so, a lot of times you're going to do more than you typically might if those were your athletes that you're training in your facility for, growth. And so typically what I try to do, I base it on the concept of leaving the facility for myself and my athletes with a win every day. And if I want to get a win, I have to reduce and simplify what I'm teaching. So if I'm teaching a speed pattern, a multi-directional pattern or something, I try to limit it to one or possibly two. And what I'll do is, if it goes beyond that, it's usually because they've been linked in a specific pattern.
Sure.
So, for example, for basketball, when during a basketball season, like this past year, when I would teach a speed pattern that was important to us for that day, it might be, Mike, sometimes it was 2 minutes to 4 minutes, but because most speed patterns happen within 1 to 3 seconds, and that's a long time. You think about it, you put a kid on a baseline and you say sprint, and I'll blow the whistle when we hit 3 seconds. Most of them are going to be 3/4 of the court. So it's more than people think. And so what I would do is, we would say we wanted to work on this closeout technique, and we were going to work on a snap shuffle to a lateral run. Okay, very, very synchronized patterns. And so an athlete would get up, snap, lateral run, bam, you're out, next, go. We might get 10 to 15 reps on each side for each athlete. And so when we're done with that little session right there, the athletes are like, okay, I get it now. I understand it.
Right.
I'm able to get them to understand level changes, how we replace, like we categorize a power shuffle where we replace footprints or we exceed footprints, as where a snap shuffle is we're short of the front footprint. You know what I mean? So when we do that now with athletes, they can walk out of that practice, because we usually huddle, and I'm saying, okay, I might say, hey, Mike, what was something that you learned today on our movement? And you'd say, Coach, it really made a lot of sense when you said stay in the tunnel, because it just helped me stay level. And so we walk out of there having gotten faster today, whether it was literally getting somewhat faster or having an understanding of what speed means today. And so my sessions are based around that concept of, can we get a win? And then we'll tackle the next one the next day. And what that did for me and my athletes is, we grew in I'll go back to the word literacy. My kids became really literate on what movement meant and how it affected their play. And what's important, especially if we're talking about basketball, is we have these general overall movements we want to be good at. But if I'm in a help position and I have to help on a drive and then recover back, well, that's going to be a snap shuffle to a lateral run to a closeout technique. So if I'm teaching these speed concepts and they understand them really well, now they play the game better because they understand speed better.
Yes.
And so even when I had the Speed Academy, and I wasn't necessarily working a sport, I was working on speed, I always gave context. I'm like, okay, you soccer athletes that are marking someone, well, this is what you have to do. Basketball and tennis, this is what you have to do, and this is why. We walked out of there with wins every day. So that's partly why I reduced how much volume I gave, and I kind of went after a specific pattern. And during a warm-up, we might hit all 7 patterns just because we're warming them up, but we targeted, and it was up on our dry erase board. Hey, today, these are the 1 to 2 skills, and this is what we're diving into. So we call it the tree principle. Here's the tree, here's the stump, and then the roots are all the options off that one skill, which is the trunk of that tree. And
I love that.
Yeah, it really helps the athletes understand, and they walk out of there with pretty good wins for the day.
So the one thing that I love about this, well, a lot of things I love about this, but the one that really sticks out during COVID, right? Kids had nothing else to do except come to the gym. Like once we could come back to the gym, so I would have athletes there, all different age groups, different sports. Yep. And this is where these movement concepts span across all sports, right? Yeah. So we're talking about lateral movement, right? And I can have a group where I'd have a basketball player, a soccer player, a tennis player, a softball player. I can teach them all this lateral movement. Yep. And then we just, hey, look, biggest difference here, like there's always little elements and nuances that are different across sports, but in a lot of cases the core movement is the same. That's right. It's just how you finish the play. That's right. In tennis, I need to be in a certain position to strike the ball, right? Yep. If I'm fielding in softball, I'm going to finish here and I'm going to turn and I'm going to throw. So like helping people understand, this is where we can be more global with it. We can talk about basketball for an hour. Yep. And then you can take all these movement concepts and apply them to whatever sport you work with. And that's what I love about what you do. And that's why, like, even you were, it was a couple years ago now, you talked a ton about tennis, right? And I know you cycle through sports, but I'm watching your tennis stuff and I'm like, this is brilliant. I didn't even work with tennis players at the time, but I'm like, but I understand now if I ever did, that's cool. But number 2, like how much of this can then carry over to my basketball players?
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's what's fun about this. And that's why I just love, I need to thank you, dude, because you just really turned me on to speed and movement. And it was like this natural extension for me, but it's made so much sense and it's made such a profound impact on my career, man.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I always remember when we first met years ago, I could tell, I remember we were in, may have been Providence, I don't know. You and I were standing out by these big windows out in a lobby.
Yeah.
Right
I remember
there.
It, yeah.
Remember that when you and I were talking about it, and I could tell you got stung by the bee, of speed. And it's a very attractive thing because how impactful it is for your athletes. And when you hear these coaches who say, we just sprint them and that's it. I'm like, right. Yeah, but man, I'm telling you, you'll be shocked on how, because if it didn't work for me, I wouldn't do it.
Absolutely.
I'm not that dumb of a coach to say, well, I'm just going to do it because I think if it didn't work, I'm not going to do it. So this multi-directional concepts of movement and how we position people, it works. It helps them. Absolutely. It gives them comfort. And to go back to your point, the one thing I've always tried to tell coaches to understand, and because we had a guy the other day ask about, he goes, you mentioned the tennis program I have. Yeah. And I said, if your kids can do that movement, they can play any sport. They can do it easily. But I've always said, teach the foundations of movement, teach the concepts. The sport absorbs the specific patterns that they get. Like if you looked at a volleyball player versus a basketball player versus an infielder versus a soccer athlete, and you looked at them in their stance, you would say, yeah, that looks like a volleyball player.
Right, absolutely.
They're going to stand there like this, right? Yeah. Basketball player is going to get a little wider, and the sport absorbs the patterns and how it needs to be used to play just over repetition. Because I move like a basketball player because I played so much. But when I play tennis, I play taller, I bounce more, you know what I mean? Because I absorb those patterns. So you can get the foundations down. I think that's phenomenal. And I said this to a coach a couple months ago. We got talking. He goes, what if you could teach one skill? What would it be? I said, if you could teach every kid how to steal a base, you would improve their on-court, on-field, whatever other movement, because so much of sport is about this concept of pop, push, open, push.
Yes.
And even when I laterally shuffle, it's pop, but it's push, open, pull. It's
Yeah.
that concepts of translating their hips, whether you have to run or shuffle. If they can learn that, they probably have a pretty good foundation of at least lateral movement.
Yeah. I love it, man.
So,
Well, Lee, I'm sure I could easily take another hour or two out of your day, but
we
I won't do
could.
that. Where can my listeners find out more about you and all the great work you're doing?
I appreciate that. If anything, leetaft.com, they can find, all the stuff we're doing. And I try to stay pretty active on social media.
Yep.
I like conversations and stuff. So I post a lot at Lee Taft. And, yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and we're having fun with it. And, I love the connections with all these coaches, and it's fun. And I know you like this too, because you've been in it so long. It's fun seeing new young coaches who just get into it that are just so hungry to
Yes.
learn. And those are the ones, hopefully you can impact. And then the older ones who've been doing it forever, hopefully you can get them to still appreciate,
Yeah.
what we do.
Yeah. I mean, 1,000%. The people that I think you and I probably resonate with are just switched on,
Yeah.
right? They're curious. They're always asking questions. And that doesn't mean, you could be doing this for 30 years or 3 months. It doesn't matter. If you're switched on and you're looking to get better, then you're probably going to get along with guys like Lee and I. So
Absolutely.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, Lee, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, as always. This is fun. I can't wait for the next one.
Yes.